Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 50 of the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. My name is Patrick Norris, and our goal today is to help you lead with a whole heart, a healthy brain, and a soul on fire. I'm so glad you're with us today in today's episode, which is part 2 of a 2-part interview with Dr. William Struthers. And today's episode is the final episode for the 2020 podcast season. With this episode, we'll have delivered 50 shows to you. What a great year we have had with so many inspiring interviews. Thank you for being along for the entire ride. Thank you for subscribing, sharing, and promoting on your platform. You're a joy to be in relationship with. If you're new to the Red Ink family, we welcome you, and we want to encourage you, go back and listen to episode number 1 all the way through for these enjoyable, rich banks of spiritual, theological, neurobiological conversations. You'll be better for it. Today's episode number 50 is a conversation about Dr. Struthers' great book called Wired for Intimacy: How Pornography Hijacks the Male Brain. So we've titled this conversation A Neuroscientist's Perspective on Porn and the Brain. And we'll be talking through why porn and sexually acting out is so common within Christian leaders, even though they have values that align otherwise. This episode is part 2 of a 2-part conversation I had with Bill. For those of you who don't know, Bill Struthers is a leading behavioral neuroscientist, a university professor of psychology and neuroscience, a visiting scholar at both Oxford and Cambridge. He's an author and one of my very favorite Christian intellects. This is a perfect way to wrap up the 2020 podcast season, and I can't wait for you to hear what Bill has to bring into this conversation. But first, let me encourage you to go to redinkrevival.com and check out everything that we're up to. While you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that hits your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post, as well as all of our upcoming events, including our Pastor's Spouse Zoom Monthlies, where I bring a top-tier church leader and a psychologist, neuroscientist to talk through strategy, vision, tactics, and emotional disruptions. It's designed to be driven by you and what you want to talk about. It is collaborative and interactive with any attenders that desire jumping in. Our next one is January 11th, and then on all the Mondays, second Mondays of 2021. The January 11th monthly will be moderated by Reverend Tony Cook, Dr. Todd Bowman, and myself. We'd love to have you there. Be sure to check it all out at redinkrevival.com. Well, let's fire up this week's episode number 50, A Neuroscientist's Perspective on Porn and the Brain. You have a book called Wired for Intimacy: How Pornography Hijacks the Male Brain. And it is, in my opinion, one of the greatest books on the topic that I've read. It goes into not only certain ideas around what porn does, the consequences, the impact on who you are relationally, but you do a uniquely profound job of talking through each part of the brain, what it's doing, why it's doing what it's doing, and even ultimately what we can do to shift it, to change it. So before we get into all of some of these particulars, I just am really interested in this word pornography. How do we define pornography? Who decides what's pornographic? And again, just set the table for us.
Well, pornography was, I think, for the better part of the time prior to the 20th century, more just kind of images that were sexually explicit images. But actually, the root of the word is actually that it's the writing about prostitutes. And so it's the writing about illicit sexuality that is what, pornography is kind of where that word kind of comes from. And so it's not until you get, until probably the turn of the 20th century with the capacity to produce lots of images, the artistic capacity gets much greater in the mass production of images. Photographs, right, for example, become a thing. You get motion pictures happen there around the turn of the 20th century. And so as technology changes, the writing about sexuality, actually, we now call that erotica. That's actually a genre. And so even though pornography, the word, starts out as writing about sexuality, writing about graphic sexuality, it's been replaced now with the term erotica as a form of literature. And so pornography, for the better part of the latter half of the 20th century, was about the production of naked images of women primarily, but also of men, or about the production of naked images or nudes of people who are either engaged in sex or sort of trying to stimulate sexual desire, or those or the movies that were made. And so much of what has happened in our life is this transition from stills or nudes over in that were designed to stimulate sexual arousal to now moving pictures, motion pictures. So whether that be the pictures that you used to see on the big screen, you can't do that now in COVID. You can't go to the theater, right? Well, even the theaters that would show those were sort of like kind of stuck away in the corner somewhere because you didn't want to show an X-rated movie and be like a reputable movie theater. So then we saw the shift over into the VHS, kind of take it home and DVDs, and then of course the internet comes on now and streaming online stuff. But I think it's fair to say that pornography is broadly understood to be any material of a sexual nature, whether that be nudes or the depictions of sexual acts, that is designed for the purpose of stimulating sexual arousal or gratifying a sexual need, and is distributed for used to be for profit. That you would buy it. So a Playboy magazine or a video that would be rented out at a family books or family video or Blockbuster or something like that. And so the standards for what constitutes appropriate artistic representations of sexuality that fit with social norms, and those that sort of go beyond that, that's a little bit of a moving scale.
Yeah.
And so back in the 60s, you have the Supreme Court cases about the obscenity laws being violated. That if you fell to the one side of that line, it was considered obscene. But if it fell to the other side of the law, it was considered, to be a form of artistic representation of the human body. And that's subjective. That's entirely subjective on a lot of levels, although it varies in levels of subjectivity. It's hard for me to think of, a really graphic, pornographic scene being seen by most people as a beautiful piece of art, right?
Yeah.
But there are some people who might look at Michelangelo, the sculptor, or Michelangelo's David, right? I got that backwards there. Where he's sort of standing there with the sling and his genitals are exposed. Yeah. People will look at that and say, "Oh my gosh, that's totally pornographic. I can't look at that," right? So the nature of and the character of the person who's looking on it is important to be part of that equation. And so how did the norms of that community, where do they set that line so that, oh yeah, this is okay to be on cable at 9 o'clock at night, but that's about as far as I can go, right? There's not like graphic X, Y, and Z kind of, things being shown. It's not particularly violent. There's a context around it, right? So there's a whole story. And so what counts as pornography is a really contested point.
Yeah,
because some people want to push that as far to this side as they can, and some people want to push it as far to this side as they can. But for me, at the end of the day, the more important issue is not how you are defining what's pornographic and what's obscene, but the important thing, a lot of it is down to what kind of person do you want to be who thinks about human sexuality and human dignity in a particular way. That's the thing we need to be focusing on, not how do we figure out what's the right legal definition so that we can ban this stuff and keep this stuff, right? Yeah. But it actually is, it's a little bit of a distraction to be overly focused on what's pornography. The better question is, what kind of person do I want to be, and what does that person think about human sexuality, so that when I am exposed to something over here that sort of crosses that line, I probably have in there somewhere, right, that I'm looking at it and I'm not either looking at it in judgment on the people, or I'm not, viewing it as a taboo that actually activates me to do something that I don't want to do, right? That actually makes me look at compassion on those individuals, or the people who are over here to say, hey, look, there's the cosmopolitan, right? As I'm checking out at the grocery store, right? And there's probably a grand total of 10 cubic centimeters of cloth covering that person's body, right?
Right.
Happens to be only covering their genitals or their nipples or something like that. For me to look at that and say, I know what's going on here. They're trying to actually get me to buy this. They're trying to get me to buy into a way of thinking about human beauty and human sexuality. And you know what? That person is beautiful, but they're not beautiful in a way that compels me to act in a way that would be inappropriate. And I can acknowledge that beauty in a way that actually makes me more concerned about them as a human being than it does about me kind of making sure that Cosmo's not on the rack there, because heaven forbid little children see something like this. But the reality is that little kids do see that, and it forms their notions of what beauty is and what sexuality is about. So it's embedded in a conversation about sexuality. It's embedded in a conversation about human dignity. It's embedded in a conversation about how do we live together. So that's kind of where I'm like, pornography is like all the way down here, and so you have to kind of unpack it rather than just say, here's the legal definition. Go.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the culture is just pervasive. I mean, you can't watch a sitcom. You can't even watch a football game without having advertisements that do create some level of neurochemical reaction if you're not, guarded, or you're not thinking about the impact it could have on you. Am I correct on how I'm saying that?
Well, and that occurs differently across different seasons of time. I like to tell a story. I remember when my son was really young, we were watching the Super Bowl one time, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the book or not, but he was really little, so he was like maybe 4 or 5 years old. And we cut to a commercial in the Super Bowl, and it's like one of the beer commercials, and there's like, a super sultry woman that you get the impression is walking around naked, and she's eating a hamburger or something like that. And I remember, and I kind of looked over at him, and he was just like curious, because he's little, so he's not gone through puberty, so mentally he's not like at a place where he's got the architecture neurologically to activate sexual arousal and lust or any of those kinds of things, right? And he just seemed really curious, like what is going on here? Yeah. And then we go back, by the way, and so then like all the and the halftime show is sponsored by Boom, right? And well, what they're showing is actually a cheerleader who is scantily clad. And across her face actually was a banner of like the beer company or something like that. But you could see what was below her head.
Yeah.
And then I kind of looked at him and I said, hey, you ever find it interesting that the cheerleaders don't get numbers and they don't get the names on the back of their uniforms? Why is that? Is that because we know who they are? Is that not, they not have enough fabric on their clothes to put a number or a name? What do you think about that? And so for him, and he kind of got that same kind of quizzical look in his eyes, like what is Dad trying to teach me here? Like the truth was, what I was trying to do is I was trying to get him to not be a passive observer, to just sort of let the image control him, and to actually get him asking questions about the images, asking questions about the people, asking questions about, well, why is it important that we know that number 34 is Walter Payton? Well, because in the context of a game, right, numbers help you know what positions the people are in. It's important that we know. Well, then why do we need their names? Well, names are so that you can actually know the name of the player, because the name of the football player is important for merchandising and records and all that kind of stuff. And so, well, then why are these cheerleaders here? Why don't these cheerleaders, are they just like extra? Are they just like extra eye candy? Are we like throwing sex together mixed with violence? Like, so what I was trying to do is I was trying to kind of get him to ask questions about the way women are represented, about the way people think men want to look at women.
Wow.
And so that there's a different way that men can look at women. It isn't just that we're just, always horny sex drive machines. There may be a time when you feel like that between 16 and 24, but that changes. And there are actually different ways of thinking about women that are better ways that actually could help you navigate that space if you start learning that this way exists before you get to puberty and after puberty. So, and I do think that there's sort of this narrative about the way that men work and the way that they're neurologically organized that really tells a story that denigrates not only women but also men. And so what I like to do as a neuroscientist is say, hey, let's look at these neuroscience stories. we got all this research shows that when men look at this part of the brain lights up, and does it have to be this way? Or does the culture make us this way? Is there something about the taboos that do this? Is this really kind of something that is fundamentally different between men and women? And so, if so, like, are men working with one set of neurological tools and women are working with a different set of neurological tools? And maybe they're like both working with, like, there's like overlap, but we're half working with, half of the tools we have, women have, and half the tools that women have, we have. But there's that other half that sort of gives us this unique masculine kind of stereotype, and this other half that gives us a unique female stereotype. So you get the kind of the sexist narratives about, oh, men, give love to have sex, and women, give sex to have love, like that kind of language. Like, hey, from a neuroscience perspective, is that a claim you can make? And so part of what I wanted to do in the book was say, hey, there's this story about men and pornography. Let's go and look at this story, and let's see if there's some overlap here. And I think what I found was that there's some overlap. It's not perfect, but the overlap could be interpreted in such a way, it could tell a story that actually gives men permission to be bad. And I don't think that's the story that's being told. But it could be a story that helps validate in some men's eyes, because it's a brain that's scientists saying it, right? So there's not something wrong with me. There's not something broken inside of me, that there is actually something that's a part of my being made in this particular way that I don't have complete control over. Now, what control do I have? How do we grow that? How do we get to a place so that image doesn't have power over you? But you know what? That's also a neurological story. And there's a neurological story about how you can actually be trained into thinking things in different ways to give you different behavioral or cognitive or emotional responses. But to what end? If you want to get to this point, how do you organize your life in such a way, and how do you make decisions, and how do you get rid of some of those forks in the roads, and how do you realize that, hey, there's the path I didn't know existed, right? And that's the path that actually gets me there. That's a neurological story as much as it is a spiritual story, as much as it is a sexual story. And that's what I was trying to get at in the book. And hopefully, I can update it, because there's some really new stuff that's come out too. I think that from the neuroscience perspective, this is in the 10 years since I wrote the book, there's been a lot of fascinating stuff that's come out that what I want to say does this, helps us do the same thing, helps us fit our embodied sexual story, our neurological story, in a place where we can maximize our embodied nature to accomplish God goals, but also recognize that there are ways that we are limited in what we can and can't do. And as a result of those limitations, what do we do? Do we just rely on the Spirit to do that? Do we recognize that our agency is much more important in making those kinds of decisions? Is it the friendships? What is it that is outside of our range of control? And then how do we organize our lives in such a way to try to minimize those things?
Well, one of the things you say in the book is that somebody who's caught in the sexually destructive behaviors, right, that sometimes within our Christian circles, it's you just pray more, or you get into an accountability group, or you move whatever the devices is out of reach. You moving them out of the bedroom, move them out of, you can't use them at certain times. Right. And yet for you, as you describe it, you neurobiologically realize that's not real helpful. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. A lot of what we do is what I'll call sin management, sort of, behavioral management. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce the numbers of times that we go online, or we look at the images, or we sexually act out to those images. And so that's what our concern is, because what we're trying to actually do is we're trying to keep ourselves clean. We're trying to keep ourselves right with God. We're trying to make ourselves be holy. And what I want to do is step back and say, okay, wanting to be holy, I want to affirm that. That's a good thing. Wanting to avoid sinning, that's a good thing. But you can't say that I don't want to do this without replacing whatever this was doing inside you with something else that helps you be holy, helps you be good, helps you be the kind of person you want to be. And so accountability groups, they can't just be about you confessing your sin, because then they just become a group that is totally about you being shamed.
Yeah.
They need to be things that, you're giving account of the good things that happen so that we celebrate together too. Like, that's what just normal, good, healthy human relationships should be, right?
Yeah.
Not an accountability group where I'm like confessing my sin. Because what's going to happen is over time that the capacity for that thing to actually change your behavior is going to weaken. And so what I think is more important are sort of these big sort of meta pictures of like, if I get a better idea of why this is something that is impacting me the way that it is, and I can replace this with something else, and I can then start building in these things. It's not about confession. It's not about shame. It actually becomes this thing that sanctifies you, this thing that is actually strengthening you and encouraging you, so that this just becomes less and less of an option. This is not a good thing for me because I'm just not desiring it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of what I want to do in the book to say, by the way, that's also a neurological process.
Yeah.
So that what happens over time is that when you are, in your 50s and you're exposed to these images, they don't impact you in the same way because you have intentionally ordered your responses to them over the past in such a way that, that image of that cheerleader or that image that you see online or whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's less about you saying, okay, how am I going to make sure that I don't sexually act out to this? It's like, I see her. I see her as a woman who's trying to support her family, as a woman that for some reason wanted to be a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. And so she sacrificed X, Y, Z, A, B, C. She's put herself through all of this to become this thing. What would motivate someone to do that?
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is, and by the way, why are they here? And why is the sideline camera focusing on this particular woman? And why is she dressed in this particular way? That just causes you to see human beings in a way other than, an end to your own personal sexual gratification. That's
so good, man. So good. You talk in your book also about how the mind and the body, how they blend, how you really can't separate the two. And of course, in my thinking, when Paul writes in Romans 12, that we're not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds. If our minds and bodies are connected, I would just love to expand out. What does that mean when your mind and body is connected, and how that moves into transformation?
Yeah, this is a big theological, anthropological question, right? Getting at these kind of issues. What does it mean to be human? Are you a spiritual ghost that's trapped in a physical body, and then, does the ghost sort of drive the meat and bone sack and push buttons inside, and then that causes the arm to go up? And there's a Christian tradition and a philosophical tradition that sort of holds that kind of thing. But there are other sort of theological traditions as well that would say, no, you are actually a unified whole, and you can't sort of yank the soul out of the body. That there's something about the soul and the body sort of exist together, and it's this complex mystery. And so I'm not experiencing synapses firing in my brain right now. I'm experiencing, hey, this is a fun conversation. I love talking about these things. There's a little camera, and there's the green light next to the camera, and I want to make sure that I'm looking at that and not always looking down at you, because I actually want to look down here at you. But I know that there's other people who. But who's thinking that thought? Is that the ghost that's thinking that thought? Is that a brain that is doing this neurological processing? And what I think are my thoughts and my free will are actually like exhaust coming out of the car. It's unnecessary, right? Well, it's a byproduct. Like is my psychological experience just a byproduct of neurons firing? And so, but it's an anticipatory byproduct, so that the neurological circuit that looks at the green light has already been activated, moves my eye muscles to look at that green light. And then there's like a follow-up wave that gives me the psychological experience, which has no causal factors, no causal power in the equation. It's that second wave that is actually me, because it's happening so rapidly, confusing that as the thing that is causing me to look at the green light. So there's this scientific and philosophical question about how does our psychological experience relate to the realities that we can see going on here in the brain. And so as a neuroscientist, I want to make sure that I understand that's actually a philosophical question. It's not a scientific question, it's a philosophical question. And once I've landed on a philosophical commitment to how I want to answer that question, that will then dictate some of these more theological responses. And so when Paul's writing, Paul's not writing from a 21st century neuroscientific perspective, right? He's writing to Greeks who have a very different way of thinking about what it means to be human, that sort of ghost in the body. That's kind of a Greek, that's a Roman tradition. And the Jews, that's not their tradition. They actually have a much more holistic tradition, tied up in this kind of term nephesh, right? What does it mean to be created in the image of God? And and even among the Jews, there were those who believed in the resurrection, those who didn't believe in the resurrection, right? And they talked about Sheol, and they talked about all these kinds of things. And so there were different philosophical interpretations of those Hebrew scriptures that there was some disagreement on, and there were people of good faith who believed that, what happens to us when I die? Are we resurrected? No. What happens when we die? We return to dust. What happens when we die? The Romans would say, you go to heaven. Well, where's heaven? Heaven's out there somewhere, right? It's a different spiritual real estate that you go to. And so for the neuroscientists, many of them in the West are just sort of like, we're taking that Roman tradition of the ghost in the body. We can't study ghosts. Therefore, ghosts don't exist. Well, no, you can't say that. But if that's your tradition, that's your Christian tradition, then you have a particular set of questions that are difficult questions for you. Like, how does the spirit, how does the soul, or maybe, and by the way, are the spirit and the soul the same thing? Maybe they're different. That's because they're theological tripartites who would argue that you have three components, right? So depending on what your philosophical and theological traditions are, or where your commitments are, you're going to intersect with neuroscience in a very specific way. But if you have a different set of theological commitments and traditions, then you may come at it from a different angle and have a different set of problems. But the point is always going to be, how does this stuff all come together at this point of my psychological experience, my embodied experience? Descartes, I think, therefore I am, right? But I've got a body, and I don't know what it's like to think without a body. Yeah. There's no data to go with that. Boy, that's just such a fun conversation for me to have with neuroscientists, to have with philosophers, to have with theologians, to have with pastors, to have with my kids, my students. I just think it's one of the more interesting questions that God keeps driving me deeper and deeper into. So, but I'm trained as a neuroscientist, and so I recognize the neuroscientific, not the naughtiness, the bad words, but like the knottedness, right, of all how things are all kind of wrapped all together. How do you undo that knot? Right, you have to be very gentle, because sometimes if you yank too hard on this knot over here, it tightens up this other one here. So you have to be really subtle in the way that you're sort of massaging, not just one at a time, but you're able to understand how all of them are coming apart at the same time. That's the beauty of what I get to do. So I'm really blessed that God lets me do that.
Oh, man. Well, we're blessed you get to do that, too. One of the things that I say that I'd love to run by your neuroscientist mind is that as a human being, so while we're on this planet in a physical body, it is impossible to have an experience. You cannot have an experience without involving your brain, without involving neurons, without involving neurochemicals and emotions and feelings. So even the Apostle Paul, if it's him in 2 Corinthians who said, I got caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or not, I do not know. When he came back and he said, it's not lawful, or I'm not capable of communicating what I experienced, for him to even talk about what the experience was, now then became embodied within him. Would that be something that you would agree with? Because so many Christians do have this idea that I don't want to have an emotional experience. I want to make sure it's real. I want to make sure it's authentic. And somehow it has been convoluted that if I have a real experience, then emotions somehow taint it. Can you kind of talk to that for a second?
Yeah, people who make those kinds of claims, what I find is that there's usually a claim underneath that is going unaddressed. So when a person says they want to have a real experience, I say, well, then what are the standards that you use to make claims about real experiences? And I'll be honest, that can go in any different direction. And I'm not even sure what direction you might be alluding to, but some people will say, well, I don't want, a real experience is one that is devoid of emotion, that I have absolute certainty of, and then maybe, maybe something else there. And that's where I would say, well, okay, then why are emotions something that you're skeptical about? What is it about emotions that you're afraid of? What is it about emotions that seem to devalue or throw the authenticity of an experience into question?
Yeah.
What is that? And so, depending how they answer that, I would say I'd want to kind of go forward there, or perhaps the question is, well, I want to have absolute certainty. I was like, well, then why is absolute certainty so important for you? Because that sounds like it's an emotionally important thing for you.
Yes.
So like, what's going on there? So a lot of times those kinds of questions, can go in that direction. Other times people will say, well, I don't like the thought of having an emotional reaction, or if I am going to have an emotional reaction, I want to make sure that it's truly from God.
Right.
It's not like a tumor or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I'd say, well, then let's say that Paul, if we were to have Paul hooked up to an EEG setup when he encountered Jesus on the road, right?
Yeah.
To Damascus, we said, oh no, he just had a seizure. He just had a seizure. That wasn't real. Are you telling me that God can't work through seizures? Are you telling me that God can't work through mental health issues like Martin Luther potentially being manic depressive? It's like that somehow means that Martin Luther's writings are not relevant. So a lot of it is kind of these fears of losing the integrity of Scripture, or the fears of believing something false about God, are things that I would say, I get that. I get why you are afraid that you would have to jettison this Scripture or this experience.
Yeah.
But let's talk about where that fear is coming from. Where is your hope? Is your hope really in that the NIV is the one proper translation, or the King James is the one proper translation?
Yeah.
Is your hope that Jesus was without sin, or is your hope that was David without sin, or Paul's without sin, because God can only work through sinless people? Oh no, I don't think that's true at all. I think that actually goes in stark contrast to a proper reading of Scripture. So for me, a lot of times it's these questions about the way they understand themselves.
Yeah.
Like someone said, well, I want to believe in heaven. Why? Because I want to believe that right now my grandmother and my grandfather are looking down and watching me. I derive great comfort from that. And I would say, okay, I get that. I think that's a completely understandable way of doing that. But hey, here's how I think about it. Here's how I think about my grandmother and my grandfather. I don't think they're conscious right now. I kind of think they're probably asleep. From their perspective, for them, it's just like every night you go to sleep, right? You're tired and you look at the clock, it's 11:30, and then the next thing you know, it's 6:30 and the alarm's going off.
Yeah.
What happened to the ghosts? Did the ghosts just turn off? So for me, a lot of it is about having conversations that are not trying to bully you, or to make you feel stupid, or to make you feel like you've gotten it wrong, and therefore everything you believe is wrong, and the entire foundations of your faith need to be thrown out the window. But it's actually it's an invitation to understand Jesus more deeply. It's an invitation to maybe shed some of the things that are really unnecessary, that we're holding on to and maybe deriving cold comfort from. But also waking us up to the richness of what God's kingdom is like now, the richness of what transformation to be a new creation could be like right now. For me, that's what I want to do. I don't always do it perfectly. I know sometimes I probably do come across as a bit of a logical or theological bully, but it's because I get so passionate about it and I get so excited about it, and people maybe get intimidated, or they maybe feel like I'm trying to tell them they're stupid, or they're wrong, or their faith is crap, or something like that. Like that's not what I want to do, but I understand why people may feel that way sometimes. So for me, a lot of it is like, hey, these mystical experiences, how do you think about them? Tell me how you think about them.
Yeah.
And then I want to hear that and sit in that, and then say, is that how I think about it? is there maybe a different way that you could think about it? That maybe if you're someone who values Scripture, that maybe there's a better way to think about it that actually has more fidelity to the way Scripture talks about it.
Yeah.
Hey, let's explore that together. That's more my style than actually just saying, this is the right set of beliefs, this is the wrong set of beliefs, and you're a heretic.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we've hit so many different tangents that have been beneficial to me, and I know it will be to our audience as well. I do want to go back to your book, where you, a few minutes ago, said that the book is 10 years old, and there are a lot of advancements and a lot of new ways of further thinking about and expanding on what you wrote. What are some of the things that you could pull forward to us and help us kind of get a window into your energy? What excites you about some of these new learnings?
Well, some of the stuff that I've been reading, because since I think back when I was writing the book and it first came out, conversations of your brain and pornography just were not part of the cultural conversation. Especially in the church, people were really hesitant to talk about pornography in the church, and so since then, I think there's been a real willingness for people to just be open about it, and I think there's less taboo associated with it, which in some ways is really good, but in some ways is problematic. The fact that pornography is so prevalent, or that sexually explicit material is so readily available on junior high kids' phones that they can watch on the bus going to school, that was not the world that you and I grew up in. That's not the world that people 10 years or 15 years ago grew up in.
Yeah.
So that's changed a lot. And so what I'm seeing is now there's more people who are interested in doing the research in this area. My one concern is that it's become an area that has become politicized, and the science around it. So you kind of end up with these sort of warring camps of people who are connected in sort of contesting the science. And they're saying, oh, the science is changing, and by the way, the pornography's changed, and therefore the politics have changed, and pornography's good or pornography's bad. And so I'm sort of trying to be intellectually honest about this and kind of looking at this going on, because at the time I was like, hey, look, this group over here, your brain on porn people, right? The Christians sort of pushing back against the cultural movement. It's like, I'm very much in that camp. I very much believe that human sexuality, for a lot of people, it's sort of processed, it can become very unhealthy, and it can develop patterns. But I also want to say, hey, well, there's also other ways of looking at this science and interpreting this. And that people could say, no, actually, porn is really beneficial, and you people over there, you're just a bunch of religious zealots, and that's why pornography is bad, because it's bad for you because you're religious. And you just need to jettison your religion, and then you'll realize pornography really isn't that big of a deal. And I'm sort of trying to be intellectually honest about that's not a bad point to make, right? Because you do see that people who are very religious, there's this incongruence kind of problem that they have. They know they shouldn't be looking at it, but they are viewing it, and that maybe is generating part of the neurological environment that is ripe for addictive patterns to develop. That's a good point. We need to listen to that and pay attention to it, which is why, by the way, I think thinking better about sex gets rid of that taboo. It's going to help kind of get rid of it. So I'm trying to navigate this space with personal integrity, as a person of faith first, as a neuroscientist second, just trying to be an irenic spirit, kind of like a peacemaker, to say, hey, look, guys, we actually don't have to really fight over this. And frankly, a lot of the things that we are seeing changes from these studies for 10, 20 years ago is, guess what's the organ that's changing the most in 10 to 20 years? It's the brain.
Yeah.
It's the brain. And and that female brain, by the way, that I mentioned earlier, remember that 50% that's kind of not overlapped? That may be why we're seeing more women getting pulled into this. We're seeing more women getting pulled into pornography addiction problems. But we're not seeing more men reading romance novels, because that part of their brain that doesn't overlap, that gets them kind of hooked into pornography, that's not causing them to read 50 Shades of Grey. Yeah. Although they'll watch the cut scenes, they'll see the edited scenes from that series. They're more than happy to watch that, right? They're more than happy to watch the 15 or 20 minutes worth of sex scenes from that movie. But they don't really care about the meta narrative, right? And that, because so my concern is that some of the clear sex differences that we saw 10, 15 years ago are beginning to disappear now in this particular dimension of human sexuality, this sort of pornography brain research. And people are saying, oh, see, male brains and female brains aren't different at all. And they're completely discounting some of these real significant differences, that male and female brains are different, because they're saying, oh, this is the one thing that we're going to use to evaluate whether these things are different or not. So for me, that's something that I want to say, hey, let's stop and reflect on this, because, men aren't spilling over into, pre-2000 female stereotypical romance novels or ways of sort of being like women from the 1950s. But we are seeing that women are sort of drifting into these more masculine stereotypes of being really into porn and more carnal and much more focused on sexual gratification than maybe we thought they were years ago. And the brain imagery studies kind of line up with some of this. So I think there's a way that you can, in good conscience, still hold those convictions, but also acknowledge that the brain and culture, they interact with each other. The brain creates the culture impacts the brain, forms the brain as it's growing up in these developmental seasons. And I think it's a really fascinating relationship between this embodied biological organ and this broader disembodied culture. Well, it's embodied by people, but it has forces that are working within it that are difficult to kind of grab a hold of with your fingers. So
Yeah. Well, Bill, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your friendship, and thank you for just doing a download for me personally and all the folks who follow Red Ink Revival. Where can people find you and your books if they want to keep up with you?
You can go to Amazon.com and look for William Struthers Wired for Intimacy. It should show up in a couple of different formats, probably Kindle, paperback. I think there's an audio book as well that's come out as well. You can go to University Press. They are my publishers, so if you want to support them, you can go to their website and you can order it directly from them. But if you do have questions on this area, do know that I do try to get back with people as quickly as possible, but I'm a professor, and sometimes I don't get back to people until like my semester break comes along, but you can email me at william.struthers@wheaton.edu, and I'll do my best to get back with you as quickly as I can.
Amazing. What generosity for you to even offer that. So appreciate you, man. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed everything you heard today. We celebrate with you in our 50th episode of the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. Again, thank you for being along for the ride, a part of our tribe, and engaging us like you do. Thank you for subscribing, sharing, and promoting on our platform. You are a true joy to be in relationship with. We look forward to many more days ahead, and we're going to release our first episode of 2021 on Thursday, January the 7th. We have a great lineup of conversation topics coming up in 2021, like mentoring your kids for a life of healthy sexuality. How about alcoholism? What and why is it? What about workaholism, a real issue for a lot of top-tier leaders? Why do you work so many hours? Or how about the love languages and why the brain evolved around yours? Or what about sexual addictions? What are they and why do people struggle with them? How about managing the leader's emotions when people leave your church or organization? Or a mind-blowing look at forgiving others, or depression. Is it demonic, faithlessness, or biological, or maybe all of the above? We're going to look at a leader's struggle to be known, how to have healthy peer friendships, and a whole lot more. It's going to be an amazing year, 2021, so be sure to hang around for all of the episodes. You might be wondering, well, what's next for you? Consider attending one of our special online events at Red Ink Revival. Also, subscribe to the podcast at any podcast provider and YouTube. Go to redinkrevival.com to find out all the unique opportunities to grow your life in leadership. And while you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post. Well, everything that we're building is to resource you to be a wholehearted leader. I'd love for you to be a part of our tribe and family, and I can't wait until we have our next episode together. I'm glad that you are with us today. We wish every one of you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you next time.